series, Literacy Instruction, How Do I Fit It All In? My name is Hannah Maloof, and I am a literacy instructional coach supporting middle and high school in the Office of Language Arts. Thank you for joining me today. In this series, we will walk through each part of a literacy session. During this time, we will explore components such as the interactive read aloud, mini lessons, small groups, conferring, independent reading and writing, and summarize and share time. While we go deep into each component, we will answer questions like, what is it? How do we do it? How long? And who is involved? So come along with me and we will dive right in. Part 1, the prologue. How do we fit it all in the middle and high school language arts classroom? Before we begin talking about each individual part of the session, it is important that we spend a bit of time talking about the language arts classroom as a whole. So let's take a look at a typical day in the language arts classroom. We're going to first start by thinking about daily work. This range is anywhere from 55 to 75 minutes daily, depending on your own local school schedule. During this time, students will either spend it in a major reading, minor writing, or a major writing, minor reading phase. This means that students throughout the school year alternate times between heavy reading instruction with writing about reading and heavy writing instruction paired with independent reading. Regardless if students are currently focusing heavily on reading or writing, the structure of a literacy session will still stand. We begin every day with either an interactive read aloud or a mini lesson. It is important to note that both do not occur on the same day. You will spend approximately 10 to 15 minutes max in this portion of the session. This time will be spent in the whole group setting and all students will participate. After the interactive read aloud or mini lesson, you will transition students to working independently or in partnerships to practice the work you just modeled in the interactive read aloud or mini lesson. This will be where the majority of your time, about 40 to 55 minutes, will be spent in the literacy classroom. During this time, students will independently practice the reading or writing work you modeled during the interactive read aloud or mini lesson, write about their reading, or meet in book or writing clubs. While students are working independently or in partnerships, you will have the opportunity to pull small groups and confer one-on-one with students. Remember that this should take up the majority of time in your day. Finally, at the end of class, it is important to share the work of the day. 5 minutes of the literacy instruction session is dedicated to this time. In addition to the daily literacy session schedule, you will note that we do recommend 100 additional minutes of reading time outside of the language arts classroom. This can be accomplished through independent reading and cross-curricular reading. Weekly, you will also note that we recommend 20 minutes of direct vocabulary instruction. So, now that we've had a quick overview of what literacy instruction looks like in a day, let's go a step further to learn a little bit more about each portion, what it is, how to do it, and who is involved. Next up, Chapter 1, the interactive read aloud. Welcome to Chapter 1, the interactive read aloud. In Chapter 1 of this series, we'll spend some time learning about the interactive read aloud, answer some big questions about what it is, who's involved, and why it's so important that it comes at the very beginning of a session. We'll also spend a little bit of time peeking into a classroom and looking at what an interactive read aloud looks like in action. The first big question we will tackle together today is, where does it fall? When we looked at our time earlier, we noticed that the interactive read aloud portion of the session comes at the very beginning of class in middle and high school. In middle and high school, you will not have an interactive read aloud every day. Instead, you will alternate interactive read alouds with mini lessons throughout the week, but more on that later. First, we need to talk about the true purpose of the interactive read aloud and why it is so important that it comes first in our literacy session. So, why does it fall at this particular place in the day? Well, it is from this time together that all of your mini lessons and small groups will stem. During the interactive read aloud, you have read a portion of an on grade level or above grade level text. And now you will return to this section of your text to share strategies in your mini lessons throughout the week and support students throughout the week as they progress in their own independent reading or writing. So in short, you will continue to return to this selection of text throughout the entire week. The next question is, who is involved? Everyone. Everyone is involved in an interactive read aloud. It is so important that all students in your classroom are a part of the interactive read aloud and get to share in that engagement and collaboration. So what is it? An interactive read aloud, or IRA, according to Fountas and Pinnell, is a whole group instructional context in which you read aloud a strategically selected text to the whole class. During this time, you occasionally and selectively pause for intentional think alouds, conversations, or writing to occur. Students will think, talk about, and respond to the text as a whole group or in partnerships. It's important to note that during this time, you typically will not call on students to share out their thinking. Instead, you'll listen into partnerships as they talk, or you'll share out what you have seen a student write. So how do you conduct an interactive read aloud? The interactive read aloud has a strong instructional purpose, and that is to focus on a specific AKS with intentional planning. This is not simply reading aloud. Rather, to conduct a 10 to 15 minute interactive read aloud, the teacher will think deeply about the skill in AKS they want students to see modeled by an expert. That's you. And practice. To prepare an effective interactive read aloud, there are a few ingredients and steps necessary for success. Number one, a text that does the work of the AKS. You will read the text prior to conducting your interactive read aloud with students to make sure that it really does the work of that skill and AKS you want to highlight. Number two, pre-planned intentional places you will stop. You'll plan your thinking and stopping points before you conduct the interactive read aloud. The third ingredient needed for success are intentional moves that you plan to make or have students make based on the stops. These could be think alouds, turn and talks, or stop and jots. You will want to ensure maximum engagement with the interactive read aloud. Let's remember, this is not simply a read aloud, but an interactive read aloud. A simple formula can be used when you're first beginning to plan IRAs on your own. Following this guide allows for students to first see you read aloud as an expert and model thinking first, focused on the particular AKS and skill before trying it on their own. Your second stop creates a low-risk environment for students to share their thinking. This could be a turn and talk. The third stop, which has and asks students to jot their own thoughts before turning to talk to a partner, is a stop and jot and then turn and talk. As you start to come to the close of your interactive read aloud, you can model once again thinking aloud at that really high expert level. Finally, your fifth stop, at your predetermined place, you will ask students to turn and talk before jotting about what they discussed with their partner. So, how does the interactive read aloud support student achievement? Through an interactive read aloud, students experience the full rigor of the AKS. Through an interactive read aloud, you've democratized the classroom by allowing all students to access the text. And now students are able to practice the skill and AKS purely without the text acting as a barrier. Students are provided access to books that are on or slightly above grade level. And freed from decoding, students can participate in an IRA, and they're supported by the teacher's fluency. During this time, students observe the teacher modeling and have opportunities to practice complex thinking in a safe environment, free from grading or fear of being wrong. So now that we've spent time thinking about what interactive read alouds are and what they accomplish, let's take a look at what an interactive read aloud looks like in the classroom. As we watch this example together, will you be on the lookout for the teacher actions that support student engagement? Follow me and we will take a quick look.
Today, I know that you've been working with The Voyage of the Frog, okay? And before we get into this book, when I'm looking at the cover, right, and you can see the cover here, I immediately infer about this book that it's going to be about a boy, right? There's a boy on this ship, and it's also going to be about a sailboat. But I'm also wondering what the deal is with the storm. Do you see the storm in this picture? From this, I'm inferring that there are going to be some challenges that this boy faces, right? But I'm wondering whether or not those challenges are just external, like the storm, but if they're also internal within himself, okay? So, will you turn and talk to your partner for me? What you know so far about this book, I know you've been reading it a little bit, so turn and talk, tell them everything you know about this book so far.
Okay, so there's a boy that's in the hospital. It was starting out because the grandfather died, and he grandpa wanted him to take the wood and wanted him to play that. So where did they
Okay, chickpeas, let's come on back. All right, so I heard a lot of great things, and I've also heard that we're in multiple places in this book. Some of us are really far ahead, some of us are still lingering in the first few chapters, and that's okay, because today I'm going to go all the way back to chapter 1, and we are going to dig a little bit deeper, okay? So before I begin reading, I know that characters as well as real people endure tough challenges. And sometimes the way that we react to those challenges and those conflicts tells us a lot about us as a person, right? I'm sure you can think about a moment where you personally have been met with a challenge or an obstacle. The way you reacted to it kind of tells me a little bit about you, right? So as we're reading today, we're going to go really deep into this character and think about how he reacts to challenges. So readers expect characters to be faced with conflicts throughout stories. These conflicts can be internal, right, like so within yourself, or they can be external, so another force or another person outside of you. As we read, let's be on the lookout today for the internal and external conflicts that our main character faces, how he reacts to them, and then also what that tells us about the story going forward. How are his reactions going to help us understand the story? Okay, are you ready? David Alspeth stopped at the locked gate, felt his hands in the weight of the small box which he could not stand to see yet, looked down on the sailboat, and tried not to cry. She was 22 feet long, wow, with a 2-foot wooden bowsprit sticking from her nose, a stainless steel pulpit above it. Her mast and boom were made of wood, kept in good shape and varnished to a high sheen. And she had stainless steel lifelines all around the small cabin and in the middle with 2 plastic portholes on each side. She was old, designed by a man named Shuck and made in the mid-60s. So old, her fiberglass had lost its shine and a faintly sanded, opaque look to it, although the original color, a robin's egg blue, still shone in the California sun. She had been made before they fully understood fiberglass and learned to make it thin, so her hull was half an inch thick, and somehow it made her look stout, tough and short and low and punchy and stout. Across her stern was a wooden plaque, and on it was hand-carved frog. David ran his hand over his face. The frog, he thought, she's mine. I'm 14 years old and I've got my own sailboat, my own complete sailboat, and I would give everything, all that I am, to not have it. He looked out across the small marina that comprised most of the Ventura Harbor. Readers, I'm going to stop here for a moment because I feel like I already know a little bit about David. I already know he's really upset, right? They've already told us multiple times that he's trying not to cry. He's 14, he has a boat, but he would do absolutely anything in the world not to have it. These pieces of information are really, really big for me. They're huge, because as I'm thinking about how he's reacting to whatever this conflict is, it tells me that he's having a hard time with it. So I'm going to keep reading to understand our character and his feelings a little bit more, okay? It was a Ventura Marina lock card made out to Owen Elspeth. He put the card in the slot next to the gate, heard the lock click, pulled the gate open. The tide was out and the walkway sloped down at a steep angle so that he had to hold the handrail to keep from trotting forward. At the bottom of the top was flat, and he walked to the slip holding the frog. She wasn't locked. Owen didn't believe in locks. He didn't believe in anything that held or confined things. If they're gonna steal something, the lock won't stop them, he'd said. And nobody had ever stolen from him, though other boats in the marina had been hit several times. Didn't believe in locks or chains or tying things down. David thought, and he shook his head and tried to shake his grief. The memory of the whole stinking mess pouring back into his thoughts. Owen had felt a backache and gone to the doctor on a Monday morning, and by Tuesday, he knew he was going to die. Knew that the cancer he had would kill him, and that they could do nothing. Nothing for him. Again, David controlled the tears. Down the dock a bit, an older man stared at him for a moment and then turned away. It had spread so fast, the cancer, so incredibly fast. A week after he'd gone into the hospital, they found more tumors in his brain, and Owen called David in to visit him. David had wanted to go sooner, but while they were running tests, Owen had asked for him to wait. David's parents, Owen was his father's brother, were taking turns staying with him in the hospital. His mother had been there when David came the first time, and Owen asked her to leave. David hated hospitals, and it was worse when he saw Owen lying in bed. He looked weak, he did, and saw Owen lying in bed, dead already, dead and done. And when David saw him, he was overwhelmed with the change. His uncle's cheeks were sunken, and his whole face was cast in a gray that somehow looked even and flat. And the smell from him was a mixture of alcohol and urine and feces. David had heard his mother say that the tumor in his spine kept him from controlling himself from the waist down. Readers, we've been reading the story with a lens to try to infer our main character's feelings and traits based on his reactions, okay? So right now, will you name some of the big conflicts, either internal or external, that he's being faced with and how they're influencing his actions? Go ahead and turn and talk to your friends.
Uncle, I have a cancer. Yeah.
Okay, Chick, please bring it on back. I heard some wonderful things. One thing that I heard very commonly is that we feel like David's really worried about his uncle, but he also kind of is grossed out by what's happening. So he has this contradicting feeling, like, I feel really bad for my uncle, but also this is kind of gross, right? We're going to look at that contradiction, right? There may be some others that come up as well. I'm going to continue to read. Instantly, without a single thought that it was coming, David threw up. And of course, that made it all the more horrible. Owen, his own Owen, who was so close, his own Owen who had taken him out sailing so many times, who has always kept himself so neat that when the wind blew his hair didn't move, his own sweet Uncle Owen, and he couldn't see him without throwing up, making a mess all over the floor. To make it worse still, Owen laughed, a skull laugh. Some smell, isn't it? And David thought, what can I say? What words can come out now to make this all right? And of course nothing came, and he stood there with the mess on his shirt and on the floor, looking but trying not to stare, hurting and trying not to breathe, and he was taken by such a roar of hate that it made his vision blur even more than the tears. There had to be somebody to hit for this, he thought. There had to be some enemy to hit for this stinking death thing that was in the room. They think I might make 2 more weeks, Owen said, shrugging his bony shoulders like 2 hooks. Tubes seemed to be poked into him in many places, and they rattled when he moved. I doubt I'll make a week, but who am I to know? David shook his head, angry jerks. Don't talk like that. Things happen. People make it. There are things they can do. There are always things they can do. But they both knew that the doctors could do nothing, could take nothing more from him, nor add anything to him to save him. All they can do now is keep me drugged up and comfortable. Owen looked past David and the window and the hills in the back of Ventura. The smog haze was thickening, and the rolling brush-covered hills were bathed in yellow muck. I want you to have the frog. Another violent shake. No, I can't take her, not like this, not this way. You love that boat, you live for it. David trailed off, paused, finished lamely. I just can't. It wouldn't be right. Owen turned a dial on a small box at the edge of the bed. A tube ran from the box to a needle that entered his arm. He had a panicked, pinched look at the corners of his eyes from the pain, but it lessened almost instantly. It's a drug computer, he said, sighing. It drips morphine into me so that I can turn it up when the pain waves up. That's all that's there for me now. Thinking of Owen, once he had seen Owen dancing at a beach party with a heavy girl, and he picked her up and held her while dancing in the sand, holding her like a feather, laughing, his arms and legs strong and tight. And now he seemed about to break from the weight of the sheets. Owen reached slowly to the nightstand next to the hospital bed. The increased drug dosage hit him, and David saw now that there was a small envelope there. Owen scrabbled for it with his bone fingers, caught it, and handed it to David. Here's the title, signed over to you. You know how hard it is to find a notary in a hospital? And the marina card is there. I think she still has some water in the tank. And there are some cans of food I left from the last trip to Catalina. I need a favor from you. Anything, and he meant it. I will die for you if it will save you. Anything. I'm going to be cremated. I want you to take my ashes out alone on the frog. Out to sea, alone. And leave me there. Take me to where you can't see land and scatter my ashes there on the water. I'm wondering how this moment when Uncle Owen asks David to scatter his ashes out really impacts David. I'm remembering that he's 14 years old. That's a really big task for a 14-year-old, right? How do we think that this request by Uncle Owen will impact the plot of our story? I want you to stop and jot for a moment in your reader's notebooks. How do you think that this will impact the plot of the story? Once you get your ideas down, turn to your reading partner and share with them what you've written. Great job. Come on back to me. I appreciate how thoughtful you all were in your jotting. Some of you wrote close to a paragraph. That was wonderful. One thing that I really heard that I think is important is that we think that this is going to cause David to go out to sea because he said he'd do anything for his uncle, right? But we also know that there's a little bit of a struggle within him that he doesn't want to do that, right? It makes him really sad. So I'm wondering how he's going to react. I'm gonna pull us up to our anchor chart really quickly before we move on to chapter 2, okay? Because we've done all 3 of these things so far in chapter 1. So I'm gonna anchor us on this.
Welcome back. Did you notice in this interactive read aloud how the teacher set the purpose for reading? She asked students to turn and talk, naming all they knew already about the story before stating what their purpose for reading would be that day. As we read, think about the internal and external challenges the character faces and how the character reacts to these challenges. This purpose really set the students up for success. The teacher then read the text as an expert and did not share the text with students. Remember that it is important for students not to have a copy of the text. The teacher read, thought aloud about how she was noticing the character react to challenges, and then read aloud more before having students turn and talk, before summarizing what she heard students say. Then the teacher read a little more, asking students to stop and jot before turning to talk to their partner. As the teacher holds tight to these stops, she is intentional about what she asks students to practice at each stopping place, raising the level of thinking and democratizing the classroom by allowing all students to take part in this learning at a very high, rigorous AKS level. Be sure to check out the interactive Read Aloud overview button on the lock for more information. Chapter 2, Teaching Points. Before we dive into mini lessons, we're going to pause here for just a moment to talk about teaching points. Where do teaching points fall in our literacy session? Well, teaching points can live in multiple places on the framework. Specifically, you will find the need for a carefully crafted student-facing teaching point during mini lessons, small groups, and conferring. During many lessons, conferring, and small group work, teaching points are written at the proficient and distinguished levels. So why do teaching points fall in so many places throughout the day? Well, teaching points are included in the sections of the day where direct modeling and immediate student engagement is practiced. Teaching points support student achievement. According to Kate and Maggie Roberts, teaching points are crafted to be clear, concise, and specific. When we are constructing teaching points aligned to the AKS, we're on the lookout for specific strategies that could elevate the work readers and writers are expected to do. Teaching points support student achievement by allowing students to practice strategies that are clear and concise across texts. This means that instead of teaching books or stories, we teach specific strategies for students to practice the AKS across a multitude of texts, allowing transfer of a skill to take place. So what are teaching points? And how do we ensure that our teaching points are clear and concise? Well, first we need to make sure that the way we write them allows for students to understand the strategy. Remember, teaching points are for students. That means that the language we use to explain the strategy needs to be clear and in student-friendly language. In order to accomplish this, we use a familiar three-part structure, explaining the what, the how, and the why. The what sounds a little bit like, today I want to teach you that readers or writers, and then you name the skill. The how sounds a little bit like, they do this by, then you name the strategy. This could be a way, thinking, inferring, tracing, or this could be a process, first, then finally. Lastly, the why. Readers and writers do this to answer the so what question. It's so important that we are explaining to students why this strategy and this skill is important for them as readers and writers. Finally, teaching points are meant to be used often during the mini lesson, small group, or conferring time period. As a rule of thumb, during a 10-minute mini lesson, you really want to aim to repeat the strategy you're explicitly modeling an average of 5 times. Now that's intentionality. This repetition calls attention to the moves you're making to explicitly model while reinforcing the strategy you'd like students to practice as well. So, for example, here's a way teaching point. Today, I want to teach you that readers ask questions as they read new and old texts. Readers question the way that characters interact, the details that are included, and the way that the theme is developed. They do this to anticipate all points of conflict that may not resolve themselves by the end of the story. So that is one way that a teaching point might sound. Did you hear the what, the how, and the why? Awesome. Now I'm going to read for you a steps teaching point. Be on the lookout for what the what sounds like, the how, and the why. Here we go. Today, I want to teach you that readers connect their new learning about a text with what they already know. That's the what. First, readers jot down all they already know about a topic or idea. Next, they read alert and leave traces of new learning as they go. Finally, readers pause and connect their new knowledge with their previous thinking. That's the how. They do this to better understand how central ideas are developed through important details, and that's the why. So as we continue to go through this series, I hope that you will hold in your minds the importance of teaching points being clear and concise. And if you have any further questions or want to dig in a little bit deeper, you can always find information on the log. Chapter 3, Many Lessons. In this part of the series, we'll spend time learning about many lessons. What are they? Why are they important? And who are they for? So where do many lessons fall in our literacy session? When we looked at the literacy session outline earlier, we noticed that a mini lesson or interactive read aloud comes at the very beginning. This or is very important. During the chapter of this video series dedicated to the interactive read aloud, I mentioned the importance of beginning with an interactive read aloud early in the week so that all other instructional moves, such as mini lessons, small groups, and conferring, could lean on the excerpt used during that read aloud. In the mini lesson portion, you'll return to a part of the text that you modeled with during your interactive read aloud a day or so before, and practice a new skill and strategy with students. Mini lessons are just that, mini. Your mini lessons should only take between 10 and 12 minutes to complete before sending students off to practice. So why does it fall in this particular place in the day, the very beginning? The mini lesson sets the stage for the rest of the class period. During this time, students have the opportunity to not only see you, the expert, model a new skill and strategy, but also try it out themselves in a risk-free environment alongside their peers before heading off to work on their own texts. So how do mini lessons support student engagement and achievement? Well, the intentional modeling of skills and strategies support student achievement. Through the mini lesson, all students have access to high levels of rigor and on-grade level text. The proficient distinguished levels of the AKS are supported by the teacher during this time. During the active engagement period, teachers can assess students and provide coaching prompts to support their understanding of the AKS. So what is it? Well, there are several types of mini lessons. Today, we're going to focus on the most common, the demonstration mini lesson. This mini lesson takes on a particular structure that is predictable, allowing students to thrive and know their own expectations for practicing the AKS work at a high level. During demonstration mini lessons, the teacher demonstrates a skill by strategy, the teaching point, and invites students to practice this strategy. So how might you conduct a mini lesson? The mini lesson has a strong instructional purpose, just like an interactive read aloud. It focuses on a specific AKS. Mini lessons are not a time for lecture. Rather, this time should be dedicated to a quick and clean demonstration of an AKS skill and possible strategy students can use before giving students the opportunity to try it right then before being asked to work independently. The mini lesson portion of the day should only take 10 to 12 minutes. So to conduct an effective mini lesson, there are a few steps you'll want to make sure you take ahead of time. Step 1 is to choose an excerpt from your interactive read aloud that does the work of the AKS. Step 2 is to write a really thoughtful, clear, and concise teaching point, including the what, the how, and the why. Step 3 is a pre-planned section of the text you'll demonstrate with. And step 4 is a pre-planned section of the text you will invite students to practice the strategy with. Now, a demonstration mini lesson has 4 parts. The first part of the mini lesson is the connection. During this time, you're going to connect students to the learning that they have engaged with prior. This might sound like, yesterday, we remember when I was thinking about. Students turn and talk about. This time allows students to connect to the work that they've already practiced and sets them up for success as they practice today. After the connection, you move into the teaching portion. This is where you will share your teaching point with your students. You'll begin by saying, today I want to teach you that readers or writers blank by blank, and they do this because blank. Remember, this is the what, the how, and the why. From there, you're going to launch into your teaching. You may say things like, let me show you what I mean. Watch me as I. Let's take a look at how the author did this. First, then, finally. Do you see how I blank? After teaching and explicitly demonstrating and modeling, you're going to move into the active engagement portion. This is really important as this time is the time that students practice what you just modeled immediately. You may say things like, now it's your turn to try, you and your partner, or I noticed. Finally, after students have time to work with your strategy independently or with a partner, you are going to move into what is called the link. During this portion, you are linking students to the work that they will do independently and in partnerships throughout the class period. This might sound like, so remember, anytime you are blank, you can blank. You already learned blank, and today you have another strategy to blank. You could also ask students, how many will try this today? What might this look like in your text? Finally, you might say, I'd like everyone to try this today and see how it works. So now that we have the architecture of the mini lesson and the idea of why they are so important, let's take a peek inside a classroom and look to see how the mini lesson really takes shape and helps students to engage deeply in the work while allowing the teacher to lift the level of the work in the classroom. Come along with me.
Right? You pulled quotes from the text, you were quoting accurately. But in 6th grade, we now have to cite evidence and put our summaries in our own words now. So today I want to teach you that readers actually write objective summaries in their own words about what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. And one way that we can do this as a reader is by focusing our writing on the most important details and then asking, am I giving my opinion? Is my summary based in the facts of the text? And then asking, can I clearly see how the details I chose to include are linked to the central idea? Can I show you what I mean by that? Those are some steps. We're going to keep coming back to this. Let me show you what I mean. All right, so let's imagine that I have received a writing prompt. We've all received those before, right? And the writing prompt looked a little bit like this. Write an objective summary distinct from personal opinions or judgments. That means I can't have my own opinion in there. About what happened to Edison on December 31st, 1879. Include the most important details from the chapter. Well, first, as a reader, I know that when I was reading this chapter, I was jotting my notes, right? Like we all jot when we're reading, and I was jotting my notes, and can I share with you what I jotted about? I felt like they were the most important details from this chapter. Okay, so as I'm thinking back to this chapter, while I was reading, I did jot some notes because there were rumors of a spectacle that Thomas Edison was going to put on this big show. I felt like that was a really important detail. And then, as I was reading, I started noticing that some critics started doubting him. They're like, Edison doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not going to do anything super cool. And as I kept reading, I noticed a couple other important details. Edison had a really good team of people he was working with. And they were well equipped and worked hard. So that was another jotting I made. And then the last jotting I made was that he was successful, right? We have light bulbs today. This was a huge success. And I felt like these were the most important details. But once I had my most important details, as a reader, I then had to put my thoughts into summary form. But I also needed to think and focus my writing on those most important details. Ask if I was giving my opinion. Ask if my summary was based in facts. And then check to make sure that I could see my central idea through my summary, okay? So I'm gonna share with you what I wrote. We're gonna see if I really did the work that I needed to do, okay? All right, so this is how I wrote my summary. In 10 days, Thomas Edison, David Colbert details the most important days, the 10 most important days in Edison's life. The information included in the Day 7 chapter was particularly important as it was the day the electric light bulb was revealed to the public. There were rumors swirling around, here's my detail. Rumors swirling around that Edison will be putting on a spectacle New Year's Eve night. However, this event wasn't as important as the author would like for us to believe. Henry Morton, a columnist with the New York Times, said that Edison himself was not even enthusiastic about his so-called invention. Edison and his team worked tirelessly to prepare and prove critics wrong when they lit up their laboratory in the darkened street to the amazement of a large crowd. On New Year's Eve, 1879, the world became a little less dark when lighting our world changed forever. I feel pretty confident about that. But I know, as a reader and as a writer, I need to make sure that I come back and I check my work. It's important that we don't put non-essential information in our writing to stay objective, okay? So now I'm gonna think, did I focus my writing on the most important details? I'm noticing the details that I've talked to you about in here, right? And then I need to ask, am I giving my opinion? You know, as I was reading this aloud to you, I started thinking, this sentence right here, it says, however, this event wasn't as important as the author would like us to believe. This feels a little bit like I have some feelings about this moment, don't you think? I'm putting my opinion in here a little too much. So I need to revise this, okay? Now let's keep going through our checklist. Is my summary based in facts? Well, now that I've gotten rid of this sentence, I think it's pretty much based in facts, right? I stuck to my details that I had jotted when I was reading. And then can I clearly see how the details I chose to include a link to the central idea. I'm going to infer that the central idea of this chapter was that Thomas Edison and his team were pioneers in the electric industry. That is the central idea of this chapter, and I'm really seeing that show up here. Do you guys see how I, as a reader, read first? I jotted some information, those most important details, and then I focused my writing on those important details. I asked myself if I was giving my opinion, and when I did, I got rid of it. And then I checked to make sure that it was based in facts, not opinions, in my own words. And then I made sure that I was linking my ideas to the central idea. Okay? So I want you to try this work. I'm going to give you another paragraph from this same chapter. And I want you to read independently and find a detail that you think is most important to add to my summary. Okay? And we're going to go through our checklist. Okay? So I'm going to put this up on the board. You know what? I think I'll read it to you. Let's follow along with it. Can y'all see this? We need to zoom in, don't we? Old school way of zooming in. You just push it. There we go. All right. So pay very close attention. We're looking for the most important details that would go into my summary. Okay? Edison's kind of light, the same light produced by regular light bulbs today, is called incandescent, meaning the light is created because something is heated. But electric light already exists in other forms. Several months before the press descended on Edison, an inventor installed arc lighting in Cleveland. That system, based on a principle that was established in the early 1800s, makes an electric current jump or arc from one electrode to another. But arc light is blinding and can only be used in large spaces. Edison's incandescent light is better. It's subtle, more like gas lighting, only better because it burns more steadily. A week earlier, some gas executives visited Menlo Park for a demonstration of Edison's bulbs and left scared out of their wits. Their profitable business, long established in public streets and private homes throughout the country, could go dark quickly. I'm going to give you a moment to independently think about what is a key detail that's showing up here. How can we summarize this in about 2 sentences without including our opinion or judgment? Okay, give you a couple minutes independently to write. To jot down your thinking. You will have a moment to revise. Okay. Pause your thinking where you are. Pencils down. Now remember, that as readers and writers, it is important that we revise our thinking. It's important that when we are writing our objective summaries, we're making sure that we're being objective, that we're sticking to the facts, and that we're clearly seeing our central idea through these facts. So I'm going to ask you to revise your summary statements with a partner. I'm going to ask you in a moment to turn knee to knee, and you are going to talk through, share your summary statement that you created, and then ask your partner and yourself, am I giving my opinion? Revise it if you are. Then ask, is my summary based in facts? And lastly, can you clearly see the central idea that Thomas Edison and his team were pioneers in the electric industry in your writing? Okay? Go ahead and turn knee to knee with your partner and share your writing. Go through the process. I think this is really on point with the details. Talk to me about this word better. What might we use to show what better means? What does it mean to something better? Ooh, that's better, right? Let's revise our thinking and change better to what's more efficient. Very good, sweetheart. Great. Taking out your opinion.
So Edison made a pretty important just
Okay, friends, let me bring you back together. This is my little Hunger Games. Bring it back together. Yeah? Okay. I heard a lot of really great thinking. And it's okay if you didn't get down your full 2 sentences. This time is about you starting to practice this work, okay? I heard a lot of really great things. And one thing that I heard that I think that I should add to this summary was that I'm actually going to edit this with you as well. This is something that came up that I think is really important. Edison's invention of the incandescent bulb was better. How many of us wrote down this word better? Yeah. But does this kind of feel like an opinion too? Yeah. So when I was walking around, I heard that we changed better to it was more efficient. Right? Than the other forms of electricity that had existed prior. This caused already established electric and gas companies to feel threatened by this invention. If you said something like that or your partner did, give me a quick thumbs up in your lap or on your chest. Yeah. Good work today. So guys, remember, anytime that you are reading literary or informational text, it's important that we write our summaries objectively. We get down our thoughts and we focus our writing on the most important details. We ask ourselves, am I giving my opinion? If I am, revise. We ask, is my summary based on the facts of the text? And then we make sure we can clearly see our central idea along with our key details. This is really important work so that we don't include non-essential information. Okay, off you go. Thank you guys for being with me today.
Welcome back. Did you notice in this mini lesson how the teacher stuck tightly to the architecture of a mini lesson? The teacher didn't read a whole new text for students. Rather, the teacher reminded students of the work they had already been doing within the text, 10 Days Thomas Edison, Chapter 7. First, the teacher connected students to what they already knew about writing summaries before naming the teaching point. She said, "Today I want to teach you that readers write objective summaries in their own words about what they have read." That was the what, that's the skill. One way readers do this is by focusing their writing on the most important details in the text and thinking, am I giving my opinion? Is my summary based in the facts of the text? Can I clearly see how the details I chose to include are linked to the central idea? This is the how. The strategy. Readers learn to write objective summaries in order to avoid getting distracted by non-essential information when they analyze a text. And that's the why. The teacher stated this teaching point before launching into a demonstration and modeling portion, showing students how she does this work specifically. Then she invited students to practice the work of the teaching point while monitoring conversations during the active engagement period. Finally, the teacher linked this work to what students will be doing independently and as they continue to write and read in the future. Be sure to check out the mini lesson overview button on the lock for more information. Welcome to Chapter 4, Small Group Instruction. What are they? How do we do it? How long and who is involved? Come along with me and we will dive right in. Where might small group instruction fit into our literacy session? Now, this is a question that is really big, right? Where do they fit and how often do we do them? So when looking at our outline, you will notice that small group instruction is paired alongside independent practice. This time frame takes up the most time in your literacy block, about 40 to 55 minutes. However, each small group pulled should only stay with you for about 7 to 10 minutes. I'm going to pause there for a moment. 7 to 10 minutes of a 40 to 55 minute session. So this allows you to quickly model and scaffold, pushing readers and writers to the next level and allowing students to try right there with you the strategy that you have modeled. This also allows for you to pull multiple small groups in a day. It falls in this particular place of the day because during independent work time, students might be reading independently, writing independently, or even working in partnerships. During this time, it's going to be a lot easier for you to quickly survey your room. Also think about how students performed in the mini lesson or interactive read aloud, or in days prior, and be able to prepare and pull students to you as they continue to work in partnerships or independently. Small groups support student achievement in a multitude of ways. Small groups and strategy groups in particular are designed to move students towards mastery of the AKS. They do this by supporting or introducing a specific reading or writing strategy for a small group of students. You're going to look at about 4 students being pulled during this time. During this time, student achievement is further supported by the intentional choosing of a familiar text or a student's independent text. Students can bring with them their own text to the group. So whatever they're reading during independent reading time, they can bring that to the small group to practice with. This ensures that students can access this text to practice the strategy without decoding. Therefore, depending on the focus, students might have different text in one strategy group, and that is perfectly okay. So what are small groups? There are many types of small groups. One type in particular that you will see often at the middle and high school level are strategy groups. And according to Jen Saravallo, strategies in strategy groups are deliberate, effortful, intentional, and purposeful actions a reader takes to accomplish a specific skill. A reading strategy is a step-by-step, a procedure, or a recipe. Strategies make the often invisible work of reading and writing actionable and visible. In strategy groups, teachers can offer strategies to students to pull the work in doable terms for those who are still practicing. So they may become more comfortable and more competent with that skill. So in thinking about small groups and thinking about who is involved, let's talk about how we might conduct a small group. So like we talked about earlier, there are a few methods and types of small groups. Today, we're going to focus on strategy groups, and even more specifically, we're going to talk about two types. The first is demonstration teaching, and the second is the self-assessment strategy group. You will want to be very selective about who you pull into your small groups. You will take into account formative assessments from your interactive read alouds and mini lessons, thinking through which students could use a next step or another strategy to spend time goal setting around a specific skill you're practicing in the classroom. So, for example, if I notice that a few of my students are reading through their independent text without stopping to track new information and then merge it with what they already know, then I might pull 4 of those students together and share with those students a new strategy to accomplish this work. Now I know that that work is really inferencing, putting together the new with what you already know. So I might pull those 4 students together. I notice that they're not really doing that quite just yet, but I keep it positive. Remember, I said they're reading through their independent text without stopping to track new information and merge it with old. It is what they're already doing well, but also what they might need to push them just a step further. So once I pull those 4 students, I might model how readers pause when they come to new details about a character, a setting, an event, etc., and just jot down what the new information might be telling me about how the story or text might go. Then I would give students time to practice this immediately with their own independent text while I'm there with them. Finally, I would leave the readers that I had pulled with an action step that they could take as they go off to continue work on their own. I might say something like, readers can pause at new details and information in the text and think, how does the new information here change or alter what I thought before? Then readers jot down that connection to the text before continuing to read. This time frame again would only take about 7 to 10 minutes, the bulk of the time being with students working with the skill that I've modeled. So that is a demonstration strategy group method. During this type of strategy group, the teacher demonstrates a skill by strategy in action and invites students to practice the strategy. Now, this is very similar to a mini lesson, except in this case, you will only have a few students by you as you introduce this new strategy to support an already introduced skill. During this type of small group, the teacher would conduct a strategy group focusing on the same skill from the mini lesson. However, they are just going to provide a different strategy and individual coaching. So what might a strategy group sound like? Some of those language stems we like to think about. So the first part of a demonstration strategy group is the quick connection. Why have I brought students together today? I'm going to take about a minute or less to connect with students and let them know I've gathered you here today because, or I've noticed that, and I thought that I could show you. Then you'll quickly move into a brief teaching period. You'll state your teaching point and immediately show how to do that specific strategy. This teach time would only take you about 1 to 2 minutes. It might sound something like, today I want to teach you one way, watch me as I, remember how we, and let's look at how. After briefly teaching students and stating your teaching point, you're going to move into what we call active coaching, similar to active engagement in a mini lesson, but active coaching takes up the bulk of the time and everyone tries it out in that moment while the teacher actually coaches individual students. This might sound like, ready to give this a try? Will you take out with the person next to you? Go ahead, try it out and I'll come around to coach you. You can then go to individual students and ask them how they're doing the work, prompting them to talk to you about that strategy. Finally, you would link students to the work to transfer their learning to every day. This will only take up about 1 minute. You might say something like, today we met to work on blank. You tried this. Next time we'll talk about, before then will you, and remember, today and every day, it is important that, and then fill in the blank. So that is a demonstration strategy group. Similarly, we have the self-assessment strategy group. This is the second type that I'd like to talk about with you today. During this type of small group, the teacher provides a strand of pathways, so multiple ways to develop a skill or an AKS. In order for students to easily understand, teachers might break down the skill per level or show an example per level using what we call a micro or mini progression. The purpose of a self-assessment strategy group is really to set goals and make plans that guide next steps towards mastery of the AKS. During this time, students would bring either their own writing about reading or their writing to a small group. You would demonstrate how you might figure out which level your own writing might be falling on, and then students would practice doing the same. They would think about where their writing falls, how they know, and maybe some next steps to push them forward. Again, this could be about reading or about their writing. You would follow the same architecture, the quick connection, the brief teach, the active coaching, and the link. However, students are then working with their own writing about reading or writing to think about their next steps and what they could do. So, are you ready to take a peek inside of what a self-assessment strategy group might look like? Come along with me and we will jump into South Gwinnett High School 9th grade language arts. I know that you've been working today on thinking about theme, and I would love if we could just share out together quickly what we had the opportunity to jot. And I was jotting myself, and if you would, you've been working so hard on this writing and thinking about the positive connotations, negative connotations, and the theme that emerged throughout the text. So if you would just lean in to your camera and share what you have written on your sticky notes so far. If you'll just lean in, get real close so that it'll show up. Mine's not showing up right now. Oh, wow. You guys were able to really write a lot. And so what I'm seeing so far is so many of you started by saying like the author developed the theme of, and you went into it, right? So you started off with that really strong statement. And I know that you all have been working often with microprogression and thinking about goal setting and how you can continue to move forward. And so today, I do want to share with you and remind you that anytime you are writing, readers revise their thinking and set goals by asking themselves, where does my writing fall? How do I know? And what are my next? And this work is really important because readers set goals to continue to grow their thinking and hold themselves accountable. So let's share with you really quickly what that might look like. So this is the scale we're going to be using today. You guys used a scale like this recently. Looks like this: 1 star, 2 star, 3 star. Great. So the jotting that I wrote down today about the theme was actually the theme of To One Coming North is that change can also bring joy. The author develops this by showing both the negative feelings and positive feelings that came along with change. And that was something we talked about in class today. So when I'm asking myself, where does my writing fall? I'm looking at these levels. And I notice that I do write about the theme that's present throughout the text, right? Like change can also bring joy. I included a detail kind of that helps explain my thinking about the positive and negative feelings. So I'm feeling like I could check off the 1 star, but let me look at the 2 star. I write about a theme and infer how it was developed throughout the text. And I break down details that helped the theme emerge. Do you guys feel like I'm doing that at all? You can turn on your microphones. Do you feel like I'm doing this at all?
I don't feel like it's that much detail as it could be.
Right, there's not as much detail as it could be. So I think that my initial thinking is going to land at this 1 star level. And that's okay, because just like Cameron just said, I can easily add more details. And then I can also explain how the details supported my thinking. Do you guys see how really quickly I used this scale and I asked myself, where does my writing fall? How do I know? And what can I do to make my writing a little bit better? So now it's time for you to try this. I'm going to give you a quick minute to go ahead and look at the scale alongside of your jottings. And then we're going to share out, where do we think our writing is falling? How do we know? And what are your next steps? You can actually jot it on your sticky note if you'd like. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to think about this. Okay, so you have some initial rethinking happening with your jots, and that's great. We're not quite ready to like jump all in and do all of the work, so we're going to get to that. But I'd like to give you the opportunity to turn on your microphones now, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I want us to be able to talk with each other. What did you notice about your writing, and what do you hope to do as you continue moving forward?
For my writing, I believe that I added some evidence, not all the evidence that I could have. Like I know I could have went to my full potential. I believe that I analyzed the text and its meaning, but I could have went deeper into what the author was trying to get his point across. And I believe I created a theme and explained how it was developed.
Yeah. Anybody else kind of see some
I feel like
similarities?
it was kind of the same for me. Like I use like one piece of evidence, but I feel like I could have used so much more to make it stronger. So put myself around it too.
Great, Cameron. Anyone else have some similarities between Jordan and Cameron? They're both kind of saying I need to add in more details, kind of make my explanation a little bit meatier, right? Make it feel a little bit more powerful. What else are we noticing?
I feel like I could have, I had some details, but I could have explained it more as to what the theme is and what the author was going for when he made the poem.
Yeah, that explanation piece can be tricky sometimes, right? Because we want to keep our opinion out, but sometimes keeping our opinion out kind of holds us back, right? So thank you for saying that. that explanation piece is important. So could we hold up with our fingers, like kind of where we feel like our writing is? Like, are you between numbers? Are you living at a 1, 2? Yeah, and so this is the thing. It's important that we remember that every time that we're jotting about our writings, we can always remind ourselves to ask, where does my writing fall? How do I know? And what do I do next? Because this is about the process. It's about your work. It's not about you. So really honing in on what can I do next to hold myself accountable. I appreciate you guys letting me kind of lean in and think about your writing. And I want to give you a minute now before you go off to go ahead and start some of that revision on your writing. So go ahead. I'm going to put the micro progression back up on the board. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to just go ahead and find some places you would want to revise. Okay, friends, about 30 more seconds. We're going to come back together to share the places we want to revise. Okay. Thank you for taking a moment to think about your next steps. I'd love for you to turn on your microphone and share out maybe what you have written so far and what you're proud of in your rethinking.
Okay, so for mine, I put the author developed the theme of war violence by using a negative connotation on words and by telling the children of Ardent that it is sweet and honorable to die for one's country. The conflict in this theme is between the reality of war and other people's portrayal of war as sweet or that it is right to die for your country. The author's use of negative words such as drowning, helpless, and choking help reveal the reality of war.
That's wonderful, Jasmine. I love that you included the negative connotations of the words and you explained how those words are really developing that theme. Wonderful job, Jasmine. Anyone else want to share out or add on to what Jasmine said?
Yeah. I think for like my evidence could have been stronger because for like I could have had a second piece of evidence that actually shows some of the violence in the war itself to make the explanation stronger and to give the reason why he wouldn't recommend people to go into war.
Yeah, that's great. Who else is feeling the same way what Cameron just said? Right? Just stronger pieces of evidence, adding that in. So as you go off today, remember that we can always practice this work together. You can always return to microprogressions, rate where your work is falling, and think about your next steps. I appreciate what you are doing, and thank you guys for letting me be with you. Welcome back. Did you notice in this self-assessment strategy group how the teacher first connected students to why they were with the teacher that day? The teacher encouraged them by letting students know that they had been working hard and were ready for a next step. The teacher held tightly to the architecture of a strategy group by connecting with the students before launching into a brief demonstration teaching period where the teaching point was stated. The teacher said, "Today I want to remind you that readers revise their thinking and set goals by asking, where does my writing fall? How do I know? And what are my next steps?" This is important because readers set goals to continue to grow their thinking and hold themselves accountable. Remember here that the teacher still held tightly to the structure of a teaching point within the small group. The teacher then demonstrated with her own writing and a micro or mini progression how she could look at the 3 levels of writing and determine where her writing was currently falling before setting a goal for what she could work on next to improve. Then, the teacher encouraged the students to practice this goal setting on their own before allowing students the time to revise in the moment and try out their new goal. This small group was pulled intentionally and taught with a precise strategy of goal setting that students could then use immediately. Be sure to check out the small group overview button on the lock for more information. Chapter 5, Independent Practice. Now that we have dug deep into interactive read alouds, teaching points, mini lessons, and small groups, we're going to take some time to talk about independent practice, reading and writing. What is it? How do we do it? How long and who is involved? Come along with me and we will dive right in. So our first question we're going to tackle together today is, where does independent reading and writing fall in the literacy session? Well, independent reading and writing time will come immediately after your mini lesson or interactive read aloud. During this time, students will practice the skills and strategies you have modeled through your whole group instruction. Remember that it is also during this time that small groups are pulled together. So why does it fall in this particular place of the day? Independent reading and writing time is strategically placed after the mini lesson or interactive read aloud in a literacy session. At this point of the day, students have had explicit instruction, and now they have the opportunity to apply that learning to independent reading and writing time. In a day, we strive for a 1/3 to 2/3 balance in your session. This means that 1/3 of the time is really designated for explicit teaching, while 2/3 of the time is devoted to independent reading, writing, talking, conferring, and small groups. So 40 to 55 minutes of your 55 to 75-minute session. So you might be wondering, how does independent work support student achievement? Well, research shows that independent practice on its own is not enough. Independent reading and writing must be accompanied by intentional instruction and conferencing with students. According to a study by Anderson, Wilson, and Fielding, students who read independently an hour a day scored at the 98th percentile on standardized tests, while students who read only 4.6 minutes per day scored at the 50th percentile. This study suggests that there's a relationship between independent reading and academic achievement. Later studies have also found that in-school independent reading leads to gains that were better than national averages in reading rates, and a 43% average increase in the proportion of ideas recalled. This represents a substantial increase in comprehension over the school year. So with that in mind, let's take a minute and talk specifically about how independent reading and practice is different from silent sustained reading in DEAR. When students sit quietly at their desks with a book or a magazine during DEAR or silent sustained reading, we might see students flip a page every minute or so, but we can't see what's happening inside their heads. We don't have the evidence of how they're making meaning of the text, the specific ways that they've grown as readers, or what they are striving to do as they read. Without that information, we can't teach them new strategies to try out. We can't be sure that they are becoming more skilled readers this week than they were the one before. This is why independent practice time is so important. For students to do more than race through a book during 20 minutes of SSR, they need the teacher to show them what behaviors they need to practice as they read. And the teacher then needs opportunities to monitor, observe, and give feedback. During independent practice, teachers monitor students' reading or writing through talk and writing so that students can receive that feedback. So what is it? Independent reading or writing refers to time students spend reading their self-selected texts or writing their own texts. Let's talk for a moment about independent reading specifically. Independent reading is an essential practice, one that develops students' background knowledge, improves fluency and comprehension, heightens motivation, increases reading achievement, and helps students broaden their vocabulary. There are a few very specific ingredients to success with accountable independent reading. Number one, students need to be able to choose what they read. Within the time set aside for independent reading and practice, what should students be reading? Well, research says that independent reading is most effective when students choose their own reading materials. According to Richard Allington, the research based on student-selected reading is robust and conclusive. Students read more, understand more, and are more likely to continue reading when they have the opportunity to choose what they read. With this in mind, it's important that we balance school-required reading opportunities with choice reading experiences to allow for true transfer of skills to occur. Number two, students need explicit instruction about what, why, and how readers read. As part of an earlier classroom independent practice, such as silent sustained reading in DEAR, students used to select books with teacher oversight, very little teacher oversight. This practice of choice without parameters is especially problematic when students choose texts that are not their just right text, a text that would cause barriers to the work. It's suggested that for students to have productive independent reading experiences, it's important that students rely on teachers to help identify appropriate and interesting materials, incorporating a range of genres and difficulty levels. This might look like book tastings, etc. Students need access to text and lots of text. For students to find things that interest them, that they want to read, that they need access to lots of materials and actual books in their hands. The library is a perfect place to start. Tip number 4 is that students need to talk about what they read. During independent reading time, it's important that students are also given the time to discuss in partnerships or book clubs. Giving students this opportunity allows for them to reflect on what they have read and to push their thinking further by sharing those reflections with others. Peer discussion is one way that students can demonstrate their knowledge of reading, which helps really hold them accountable and improves comprehension. As always, you can find more information about independent practice in reading and writing on the LOC. You can scroll down on the main page and look underneath the literacy instruction section. Next up in this video series, we will take a deeper look at how we conduct conferences with students while they are reading and writing independently. Chapter 6, Confirm. In our last chapter, we dug really deep into thinking about independent practice, how students can read and write independently in peer partnerships and in book clubs or writing clubs. During this chapter, we are going to go deeper into conferring, what the teacher can do while students are independently practicing. So let's take a deep dive. Conferring. What is it? How do we do it? How long and who is involved? So the first question we're going to tackle is, where does it fall in the literacy session? When looking at the outline, you notice that conferring happens during the independent practice period of the class time. Remember that independent practice time takes up the most time in your literacy session. However, each conference you conduct with students should only last about 4 to 5 minutes. This time frame allows you to quickly listen to students' thinking and current work, provide feedback to push readers and writers to the next level. This also allows for you to talk and confer with multiple students in a day. So why does it fall in this particular place of the day? Well, the purpose of a conference is to formatively assess a student's progress towards independent mastery of the AKS. So in order to provide individualized feedback and student goal setting, conferring comes during the independent work time. During this time, teachers have the opportunity to really see how students are practicing, progressing, and transferring the learning that took place during explicit instruction, the interactive read aloud or mini lesson. So how does conferring support student achievement? According to Jen Saravallo and Gravity Goldberg, deciding to confer is a commitment to the kind of classroom where reading and writing volume matters. Conferences provide a way to meet individual students' needs in manageable and meaningful ways. Conferences are typically 4 to 5 minutes and are designed to move students through proficiency levels while keeping a keen eye on deep mastery of the AKS. Through a conference with a student, teachers can focus on one clear teaching point at a time and be responsive in a one-on-one environment to the individual needs of readers and writers. During this time, teachers are focused and their conversations with individual students are centered on coaching students through difficulty and removing support when students can transfer their skills to their own reading or writing. This time is purposeful and is driven by assessment, feedback, and goal setting. Because of this, it is important that teachers document and monitor progress of their students while keeping track of students' goals and possible next steps. So, how might you conduct a conference? Who is involved? Well, there are several types of conferences, and you can read all about them on the lock under the conferences button on the homepage. Today, however, we are going to talk about a specific type of conference, the Complement Conference. This type of conference is essential to building relationships with students and supporting them as they work independently. During a Complement Conference, the teacher researches the reader or writer, paying attention to what the student is doing well. Then, the teacher compliments the student by naming specifically what the reader or writer is doing well, complimenting their specific student actions. The teacher might remind the student that anytime they are reading or writing, they can practice that very strategy. Hey, do more of that. The structure to this conference is as follows. First, the teacher will listen in to the students as they talk about the work that they've been practicing. Then, the teacher will notice and name what the student is doing well. Finally, the teacher will decide what they want to compliment that supports the work of the AKS before complimenting the student. The simple language of, "Can I pause you right here? Do you mind if I give you a compliment?" is key and supports the building of a positive, trusting relationship between the teacher and student. These conferences are risk-free and leave the student feeling confident in what they're already doing well and sets them up to continue doing just that strategy. So are you ready to take a peek inside a Complement Conference? Come along with me and we will jump into 9th grade Complement Conferences.
Hey Carter, thank you for being with me today. I'm so excited to hear all about the reading and writing you've been doing for Unit 1. And I know last time we talked, You shared with me that you've been working on reading memoirs as inspiration to your own writing. So could you share with me a little bit what you've been working on as a reader?
Okay, well, for the book memoir, I chose John Lewis's March because I just think it's really interesting, and it has some aspects of it that were really fun to analyze. Also, John Lewis passed away recently, so I thought that I should probably do March. So it's just a couple of basic things, like how the police are represented in a dark shade of gray while the protesters are represented in a light shade of gray. How you can't really see the faces of the police that well, but you can of the protesters. This one I thought was interesting. It was the speech bubbles. Mm-hmm. How the speech bubbles of the protesters were like smooth and non-threatening, while the ones of the police kind of looked like buzzsaws.
Oh, wow. So Carter, one thing I'm noticing you're doing with this graphic novel is not only are you analyzing the scenes, but you're analyzing those like intentional author's craft moves that John Lewis made to make sure that readers understood and felt what the setting was like, right?
Right.
So can you show me a little bit where you have been doing this work, the really detailed thinking work about the setting in your own writing?
Well, I have some seed ideas.
Okay, so let's expand. Which of these seed ideas are you really thinking about expanding on and thinking critically about when it comes to those details and the setting?
Well, when it comes to attention and detail, I would have to say my dog dying or my mom getting sick, but I don't think I'm ready to write about those yet.
Yeah. And that's 100% okay, right? We don't have to expand on all of our seed ideas, but knowing we can always come back to them when we feel a little bit more comfortable to really zoom into those ideas and those moments in our lives. Is there one of these seed ideas that you've really wanted to expand on that you feel comfortable with right now?
I was thinking about getting my dog because it's an interesting story looking back on it.
So can you show me how you've been doing a little bit of this work, really zooming into setting and details in this story, driving to Alabama on New Year's to get Biscuit?
Okay, so here's a little picture of him.
Oh, so sweet.
So, this was, about the dog I mentioned dying. His name was Butter. This was I think a year. Yeah, it was a year after he passed away. And so our neighbors wanted to get a new dog, and they had 2 dogs in the picture, so we decided, hey, let's go get a dog too. But it was interesting because we went there. It was an 1.5-hour drive. Wow. It was snowing a little bit, and we meet them in the back of a Shoney's parking lot, not the front of a Shoney's parking lot, the back of a Shoney's parking lot.
Ooh.
Yeah. And it was a cash only transaction, only in cash, $250 in cash per dog.
Very interesting.
So, and they were wearing, both of them, they were a couple, I think. They were wearing these camo vests, and at this time, I didn't know this at the time, but they had no breeding records or anything about this dog. They didn't even know what breed he was.
Wow. So Carter, can I pause you here for a second? Because you're doing something through your oral rehearsal of this story, of this moment in time. And I'm noticing that in your reading, you paid really close attention to the setting in your reading, right? And then here, when you're thinking about when you got Biscuit, even still, you're really honing in on that setting in the back of a Shoney's parking lot. 2 people in camo vests without papers for these puppies. So I think that even though you've chosen a story that, feels comfortable for you, you're able to bring in that tension with also a little bit of humor. So I want you to remember that anytime you are thinking through your writing, you can always return to your reading as inspiration. And it's always a good idea to try out these stories and to try out these seed ideas that feel the best for you. So as you go off today, I encourage you to continue this work and continue returning to your reading as inspiration.
I will. Thank you, Miss Malou.
Welcome back. Did you notice in this compliment conference how the teacher first encouraged the student to share the work he had been working on as he was reading memoirs and beginning to write his own? This allowed the teacher to research what the student was doing well. Did you also notice how the teacher asked probing questions to move the student along and gather more information about what he was doing as a reader? The teacher spent time listening before noticing and naming what the student was doing well. After deciding what to compliment, the teacher made sure that she called attention to the skill or AKS that the student was practicing. Finally, the teacher clearly and concisely reminded the student that they can continue to practice this work. The teacher said, "Can I pause you here for a moment? You paid really close attention to the setting in your reading, and you are also doing this in your writing, honing in on a setting. Remember that anytime you're thinking through your writing, you can return to your reading as inspiration." Be sure to check out the conferences overview button on the lock for more information. Welcome to Chapter 7, Summarize and Share. Now that we have dug deep into interactive read-alouds, teaching points, mini lessons, small groups, conferring, and independent practice, we're going to talk a little bit now about summarizing and sharing. What is it? How do we do it? How long and who is involved? Let's start off by talking about where summarize and share fall on the literacy session. When looking at the structure of a literacy session, you'll notice that summarize and share are both placed together in a 5-minute segment at the end of the session. In this video chapter, we are going to talk about summarizing and sharing separately. So let's first talk about summarizing. Why does summarizing fall in this particular place of the day? So before diving too deep, let's just start by naming that providing opportunities for students to summarize is not the same as providing an opportunity for students to share their learning throughout the session. Summarizing is something that actually happens throughout the entire day, the entire session, and can happen at any time during the session. It is work that is embedded in all that students do and should not be treated as a separate thing. Because of this, summarizing should not be done in isolation. Summarizing really supports student achievement throughout the session. So when integrated into the instructional day, summarizing can have an effect size of 0.86 according to Classroom Instruction That Works by Dean, Hubble, and Pittler and Stone. And according to Rick Wormelli, summarizing helps students to deepen their understanding of the information they're interacting with and processing. Students must analyze information at a deep level as they decide which information to keep, which to delete, and which to replace with more general terms. Summarization is one of the most underutilized teaching strategies and techniques we have today, and yet it yields some of the greatest leaps in comprehension and long-term retention of information. So if summarizing and sharing are two different things, and summarizing happens throughout the entire session, maybe taking up a total of 5 minutes throughout the session as you work through, where does the share fall in the literacy session. Share time is what comes at the very end of your literacy session. So why does it fall in this particular place in the day? And how does the share support student achievement? Well, similar to a mid-workshop interruption, shares might be a time to honor students' work, but these 5 minutes can also be a time to directly teach one more concept. Shares should involve student work, and they should create a sense of closure for the day's reading or writing work. This opportunity gives students that stick-with-itness to go off and continue to practice the work from class independently and successfully. Finally, shares allow an opportunity for teachers to formatively assess where students are and inform them of what next steps they might take. So what is it? A share might sound like a few of these ways. It could sound like teachers teaching another strategy to add to that day's anchor chart or previewing an upcoming teaching point for the following day's work. It might also sound like students talking about their process in partnerships or triads, and then teaching one another how they actually accomplished their work that day. It might sound like students reading a part of their writing work and receiving feedback. It might sound like students helping each other through challenges and celebrating goals met. It might also sound like teachers allowing writers and readers' voices to be heard in partnerships and groups. During this time, students can use checklists, anchor charts, and rubrics to set future goals. So are you ready to take a little peek at what a share might look like at the end of a session? Come on with me and we will take a peek inside the 6th grade classroom.
Okay, readers, we're going to pause here for today. Don't move just yet. You've been doing really, really great work as readers today. I want you to find a reading buddy and share with them what you've been working on today as a reader. Go ahead and turn and talk with somebody around you. Share with them your sticky notes. What have you been working on today?
About what you said earlier about how the environment changes affect the characters, it affects them because like as it goes on, more things are coming out of the volcano, like more debris, molten rocks.
Okay.
Like, different things that could affect them as they're going on.
So what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing you say is that when the environment changes, it causes a new conflict for the characters. It may then need to think about how the characters are responding to that change. Yeah, you did some really great work today as a reader. Will you choose the sticky note that you're most confident in today and put it on the Stop and Jot lot for me with your name on the back of it? Okay, readers, if we could come together for a second. As I've been listening into your conversations and I've been talking to you today, one thing, not just one thing, multiple things that you're doing very well, thinking about how events in a text build on each other and how it structures our novel, right? What does one chapter do that then builds on the second chapter? What's the connection? You guys have been asking yourselves, how is this chapter working with the other chapters? And how does this connection add meaning to the story? Before we leave today, I want you to choose the one jotting that you are most confident shows this work today, and I want you to stick it right over here on the Stop and Jot lot, okay? Go ahead and do that, and then you can pack up.
Welcome back. Did you notice how in this brief peek inside the classroom, we saw a share session at the end of class? Did you notice how the teacher allowed each student's voice to be heard in partnerships, while also providing an opportunity for students to celebrate their success that day? The teacher did this by having students share their process of what they had practiced that day before selecting their best work to place on the Stop and Jot lot. The teacher then could use this lot to inform further teaching. Remember that the share portion of the day should not take more than 5 minutes. Remind students of the great work that they have been practicing and then engage students in sharing their own work to ensure true transfer. Be sure to check out the Summarize and Share Overview button on the lock for more information.